Good morning, everybody.
Good morning, everyone. Good morning, Stefan.
Good morning, Cristina. Good morning, Vlad.
So, should we start a bit of discussion on culture and cultural intelligence? I heard more. And we have Stefan with us. And I thought about this week of what are the things that I would say about you, Stefan? And I think the first thing that jumped to my mind was a very warm person and a brilliant personality. So those are the things that I realized throughout of the interaction that I had with you, and not only in this format, like how do we prepare for this event, but also throughout other things. I think that's the point that came up the most. And besides that immense knowledge and expertise, I really, really appreciated this attitude of keeping it extremely friendly, extremely light, and extremely relaxed, and bringing those concepts in a very fun and relaxed manner in all of the conversations. So that's what I took out from learning you, knowing you, and learning a bit about yourself. But I think it would be best if you tell us a bit about yourself. Who is Stefan?
Oh, thank you. Oh, wow. First of all, thank you so much. That was a unexpected, very, very nice introduction. Yeah, so what can I tell you about me? So I'm obviously a coach, solution-focused coach, but that's not really my main profession. My main profession is being an academic, so I do research. And within that context, and this is where it all goes back to cross-cultural ideas, my PhD is in cross-cultural psychology. So in my case, it was originally applied very much to marketing, but and messaging. But again, this is sort of the context where I was, or how I came to sort of cross-cultural psychology as a sort of, is it a job title? I'm not sure, but sort of, that somewhere there where the title appears in an official way. I also lived in a lot of countries and worked in a lot of countries. So I think cross-cultural to me is very much alive. It's kind of in me. So I'm currently working for an Australian university. I'm living in Germany. I just came from Portugal. I used to live for a long time in the UK. I was visiting professor in Colombia. You sort of see where, it's quite sort of somewhere there with lots of moving around, and meeting lots of different cultures. And it's this really fascinating thing for me of doing this and working with lots of different cultures and people from lots of different backgrounds. And so this is also one of the things that I really appreciate in coaching. The other thing maybe I should say, I also work with a lot of minority cultures. So there's another kind of thing which, again, brings another kind of cultural aspect into the fold. And it's really interesting to see how this works very well, if it works very well. And it's, a real resource for an individual person, for everybody in the group to work well together, or it has a potential to be a complete and utter catastrophe, if it all goes wrong. And that's also where I think, for a lot of what happens if it's going to be the really good one, or if it's going to be the catastrophe. That's where coaching can do so much, because it's so helpful, particularly in the sort of early transitions into a culture, or doing kind of being exposed interculturally, whatever that means. And it can mean a lot by now today. So, yeah. So.
Okay. Thank you very much. Preparing this event, I was thinking about the title of it, and I tried to understand if it came from my medical background. It was about our intention to uncover what it's covered, because culture, it seems something that everybody knows it, but actually it is much, much deeper than we can imagine. And I'm wondering what would be a better title for us and how much we can uncover together today.
For today, I guess, we can only scratch the surface, right? But maybe we can create some willingness to explore it more and some openness, because I think actually the one point you're raising is an interesting question in many different aspects, and that's the sort of the hiddenness of it all. And it's really fascinating how this. I once read an article about cross-cultural coaching, which basically pointed out, this was an academic article, so but it did point out one of the things about cross-cultural coaching, and that was that it was a paradox in many ways, because it uncovers something that may not necessarily be so important, because sometimes there's a tendency, for example, to overemphasize culture and kind of like boil it down to cultural differences. While for other people, it's completely hidden. Yeah, so they don't even see a cultural dimension to something happening, although it's clearly and obviously there and a big impact factor. And then, of course, this, if we're talking about this kind of hiddenness, let me just share a slide with you, because it's a lovely model of culture. And the model of culture, there are lots of them, to be perfectly honest. But I particularly like this one is an easy one. It's from one of the cultural models called Hofstede's Cultural Onion. There are various variations on it, but it does give exactly the breakdown. So and I love this idea of the onion of culture, because it's almost like, there are some symbols and there are some heroes, some rituals, some values. Sometimes, it goes from in more sophisticated models, this is more sophisticated in terms of more scientifically published. Sometimes you get sort of things of the appearances, but basically the model stays the same, and you end up in a thing called assumptions. And if you think about any intercultural encounter, this is really what happens. So, for example, you go to a foreign country for holidays, you start to discover symbols. So you go to Spain and you see people dancing flamenco. So you go, oh, right, now I know something. Or paella and sangria, and so suddenly you think but you're really scratching. You're really on the outer edge. You're seeing some sort of little things, and then eventually you can move down. And for example, if you live in a country for a longer period of time, you will sort of slowly but surely unpeel this onion until you come to sort of the core values. And of course, the core values are an interesting point, because they're often the kind of values that nobody really expresses. So in this part, I like a slightly different model. Let me just stop to share this. Where they're talking not necessarily the values, but they're going one more level deeper, and they talk about assumptions. And so in that particular cultural model, you sort of sit there, and the core assumption might be, for example, democracy is good. Nobody would ever challenge this. Yeah, all humans are equal. It's like a sort of a thing that you're going like, oh yeah, of course. But actually, these kind of things could be challenged, and suddenly they're kind of going like, and people will start to go to sort of roundabout way and kind of like trying to defend it. It's like all people are equal because all people are equal, or democracy is good because democracy is good. And that's often where you get into this really nitty-gritty. But to understand thinking about that, you really need to uncover a lot of things. So it's really this kind of, so what you've said really, really triggers this point about, kind of like, it's so complex, yet, it's so hidden, yet it's so obvious. and also, you know, moving down. Christina, you look like...
I'm like, my brain now goes making some connections, and I found it interesting because I looked also at the words that you used, and you used values in the first model. There was values, while in the second model that you were talking about assumptions. And for me, the two are obviously, they have a different connotation. I value something, but that can be also personal values. There are joint values for us as a community. There's general values and so on. So values has different, while assumptions, it sounds to me like there's something that I take it for granted. And like you said, once you start debating those ones, you start putting the entire foundation into shaking. Also a bit the same with values, but I think that those values are something that we just give from one generation to another. And the one thing that came now immediately to my mind is, you might notice that I have something like this clips to my blouse, and this is one of the things that it was also in your in the onion model that you just showed now, and this is linked to traditions, to symbols, to things like this that are, for example, in Romanian culture, because right now beginning of March for us means always something like 1st of March is Mărțișor, which is, you have these red and white lines, and Vlad is now
Yeah.
So
it's very funny because it was my impression that he's trying, or it is trying to get in the picture.
He wants to see his one also. So see, next time we know to who needs one also. But this is the same thing, you know, you transmit them throughout your culture, and those values, but there also, these are symbols more, and these are traditions. And how does it happen when you start looking at them, analyzing, and kind of like rationally debating them instead of taking them for granted?
Yes, and it becomes really complicated, right? Because, for example, like a foreigner or somebody who's not used to the culture, put it that way, might not realize at all what you're trying to say. So they're happily oblivious to everything that's going on. Depending on the item or what it is or what it might mean, you know, some people might get offended. Some people may not get offended. You know, some people may be supportive of it. So, you know, it's such a tricky thing. And I think it's also a very tricky thing, having the journey to realize that somebody may not understand, or to realize that somebody does understand sometimes as well. Yeah, and I think that's I can talk about me personally. I'm having this journey. I had this journey over the last year or so, because I was born in Germany, and I returned to Germany after 30 years of being abroad. So a lot of contemporary German symbols like that, or, you know, kind of ideas, I just had no idea about. But also in the interchange with other Germans, I didn't appear as a foreigner. So they were not even pre-warned that I may not understand it. You know, and so they were like talking about something, and you know, I had no idea what they were talking about. And then they were very confused when I asked, well, what is that thing? You know, sort of like often related to politics. This is things that change very quickly. But it's exactly that. It's sort of, you know, so you may be communicating a whole lot with one symbol. I may just not get it. And I guess that's a positive scenario, because of course it could also be the opposite, right? It could also be that you're communicating something, and I get like, oh, whoa. If I'm not aware that you maybe communicate something different. I always remember the first, I think it was a Hindu wedding invitation I got. It has a lot of swastikas on it, because it's of good luck there. To me, you know, I was like looking at this and I was like, they put this in the post, right? So, and I didn't even think that it was the other way around. But it was like, oh my God. there's the first reaction, and then of course first reaction kind of, okay, well, this must mean something different because, surely this wouldn't work. But it's those things that, it could potentially be something very offensive. And I think if you look at a lot of the sort of the cross-cultural story pot, I guess, it's often full of these kind of funny encounters. I'm always a little bit wary of them because I think a lot of the times actually what I had as a reaction is probably the reaction that most people have, at least, if they're a little bit culturally sensitive. Then they kind of go like, hold on, there must be some other meaning here, or the person isn't aware of what they're doing. But of course, that can happen. So, and can be quite funny in some ways if it goes funnily wrong, right? So, I remember once missing an appointment with a friend because he thought Stephan is German, so therefore always punctual, and I thought he's Mexican, so therefore always not punctual. So I was 15 minutes late and thought, like, oh, I don't have to call him. It's fine. He will be 15 minutes late anyway. And he was actually on time and left after 10 minutes thinking, oh, he isn't coming, or, like this isn't working, which was quite funny. So, and then afterwards we sort of looked at it and kind of came up. How could this happen?
This reminds me of, I've been to André Rioca's concert in Germany, and orchestra on the stage, he goes the first half of the show, takes the break, says we come back in, goes dong, everyone should have been back. He goes back on stage, half of the room not there, which from his assumption, the same thing. These guys they have to be German. I mean, I'm doing a concert in Germany, half of them they're not back, so they're late. And waits a couple of 2-3 minutes and then goes to the mic and says, well, I thought German punctuality is something else. So, which I think is the same thing, you can react funny and say, yeah, that was the nice one, I got it, noted. Or you can go be upset and offended by it and say, what? How come? How dare you to, you can turn it into an insult because you feel that it goes down to the core of those values.
Mm-hmm.
And
yeah.
probably that's the moment when it definitely turns bad. And now comes the idea of how do you reconcile those things? How do you get people open to see that they're just assumptions or they're just perceptions, better to say, because we look from outside to a culture and say, they're Germans, they have to be punctual. Same thing they would expect of Romanians to come in, like they're going to be this 15 minutes, this flexible way of looking at time. Yes,
exactly. That's the thing. It's like, and I think that's where the coach can really help, because this is a really tricky disconnection that you're talking about, right? And I can so relate to this kind of thing. I remember like moving to a culture where it was very flexible with time. And I think it took me over a year to adapt to this. And I'm not there. I know this every time. But it's fine. I realize, it's my values playing up. Like I know I'm always on time, and then I stand there for 10 minutes. And I struggle with myself for not getting, don't get angry, because in Germany it's an insult if you are late, and this is really bad. And you're gonna go woo. And you're like, no, it's fine. That is, but it's exactly where the coach can really help, right? Because you're sort of sitting there, and your first gut reaction is an emotional reaction. It's this sort of thing that comes from the value. Like my values are being triggered here because, you are not taking my time serious. So you're making me wait, or you are disregarding my community, or you're disregarding my individual rights, for example. Whatever it is, you're sort of that's where I start to become very, very anxious, and I don't think that reaction for most people will be a very, very conscious one. It's this unconscious one. And that's why I think sometimes cultural models, they have a downside, but often they have a very, big upside, because they create this. And if you look at them, if you look at any of the models that are out there, and we can talk about one or two if you want in detail, but they are basically based on the two extremes. And it's always about reconciling these two extremes. So let me look for one. Hold on, I've got a couple of them here. So for example, this one is a really really nice and easy one. There are lots of them. This is it's mostly based on communication styles. But you can also have this in a slightly, in more sophisticated ways, like for example, Hofstede, which I just showed before. But the whole is kind of nice because it basically has two. It divides the world in two. It says there's a high context environment, cultural environment, and there's a low context environment. And so you have immediately this kind of thing, well, which one is it going to be? Because you can either be in a high context environment, so you talk, and it's all very symbolic, and everything starts to have a symbolism. So there's a lot on this idea about the emphasis on the background, on where somebody's sitting, for example, who was being served first. The personal reputation is playing a part. All these kind of things are huge. So, and then you have the low context one, so everything is very explicit, like, you have to do this. There's this kind of direct orders, for example. There's not this entire meaning making going on around it. It's really about, for example, a lot of legal frameworks are very kind of specific and very clear. And so you can see what happens if communication goes wrong in these areas, because where there are all the kind of pitfalls that are possible in this area. But at the same time, you have to reconcile it. Of course, the representation, I think that's a really important point to put to point out. With whatever cultural models, is always the one extreme versus the other extreme, and both extremes are possible, but the reality on the ground is somewhere in the middle. So nobody's really totally low context or communicates in a totally high context. But because you have these two polar opposites, have to move on the scale somewhere, and there's so much room if you're not careful, both sides, to totally misinterpret. And this misinterpretation, as I said before, then happens on the basis of values and misunderstandings, because maybe I consider that I should be seated in the middle of a congregation, but I'm seated 3 places down because I might be very offended. And again, it's up to the coach to then, for example, go, or could potentially go back and say, okay, well, this is what's happening here, and bring it to the forefront. And I think that's where the coaches can be tremendously useful. And you can play this out in almost any scenario. I'm just thinking, for example, trying to make friends.
Yeah.
It's very difficult sometimes.
And I assume that as the same, exactly these things that you have to be aware of, those are the things that you have to take them even more into account when you're talking about leaders that move from one region to another. Because you have obviously head of companies, head of multinationals, that they are now head of Germany. Next day they move to, like you had there, Japan, where everything is concentrated and focused on who's that person in front of you, what are the things that makes that person credible, and you go with a different assumption based on your culture, and it comes to when you were talking about all of those things, I realized that it reminded me a lot of this information that you get also when you do, for example, fraud investigations, and because those are also components that you have to take into account, because context is very important. What happens? What is it that you can Like, what are the small clues that you can gather from everything else that goes around? And I assume that also from all of the cultural models, that are components that would help you look at a culture and, you know, get those clues out of it and try to understand more about it.
Exactly, and I think you know, so the cultural models really help you to quickly categorize a culture. So you are, I guess, you know, in a way, you're primed to see what you may be seeing. You know, I'm being particularly vague here because, you know, it's very dangerous to sort of sit there and, of course, cultural psychologists call that talking about an ecologic fallacy. It's the sort of thing of, you know, I look at a value for a country and then decide that, you know, Vlad is exactly like this because the Romanian average is exactly like that. You know, it doesn't work with age, doesn't work with anything else. It doesn't work with cultural values either, but it does prepare you a little bit. Yeah, so it does give you a clue how things might be turning out. And of course, that's the thing. The other thing that's also maybe important to notice is the sort of thing of cultural models, while they give a global view, give a local solution. You know, it's a very individualized solution. So, for example, if you're interested to find the difference between Portugal and Spain, a cultural model will tell you, you know, how they measure differently. Or between Romania and Bulgaria, for example, you know, you can probably see, you know, slight differences somewhere in one or two of the dimensions generally there in these dimensions, which is kind of pole opposite.
That's actually an interesting thought process that you brought in just now, Stephan. Stephan, right?
Yes.
Can I address you as Stephan? Hi, my name is Ajay.
Please.
In fact, this is one of the points that I've been researching, and in fact, my book on Across Borders. The book is called Across Borders, which is coaching across different cultural aspects. See, you hit the nail on its head right now when we talk about either, like, you know, we are talking about Trompenar, or we are talking about whichever model of culture. It's a vast generalization, so that's a major challenge. All right, and of course, that isn't a major challenge with that. Now, the challenge is coaching pretty much has been one-to-one. So culture pretty much in terms of generic culture doesn't play that much of a challenge there, because that's where your personality profiling as well as your transaction analysis, ego states, and all that stuff kicks in. Again, that is a culture. We are talking about country-wise culture, which is what all the culture model talks about, whether it's individualism or power distance or blah 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 and all that stuff. Now, having said that, now, so what exactly are we talking about culture here? That's the question that we need to really address. And your culture, we are talking about individualistic culture, individual, not individualistic. I'm talking about you as a man and an individual. You have your own culture. Likewise, each one of us have our own culture. And then our culture is now based on what motivates you, reasons for performance. Very interesting, because I'm going back to Maslow's here. All right, Maslow's is amazing. Yeah, it's kind of amazing in terms of it's so simple. It's goddamn simple, but you look at it in a different way of interpretation. It gives you the exact reasons for motivation. Why do I perform, and why do I want to work, or why do I want to do anything? And now this leads to your ego states as to how I'm going to look at my entire prospects of approaching my performance. So I'm actually now connecting up all three. The cultural models are amazing to understand how we can enter a coaching discussion. Like, for instance, you said Romania and Bulgaria. As a foreigner, I'm still getting hit with these two words, dumneavoastră sau tu. Dumneavoastră is a respectful address in terms of your highness type of a thing. All right. And tu is pretty much first person. Hey, mate, how are you doing? And I'm still getting hit with that. All right. And
I think here Stefan understands that completely, because that's the same thing that happens in German. As you go everything with Z,
all right, yeah, okay.
and then you have to ask permission to talk with du, with you.
And
Right.
it can be really scary, because I remember I brought a friend from the Netherlands who kind of spoke a little. This is a good example of, you know, kind of misinterpretation. A friend from the Netherlands, everybody generally addressed being as du, yeah, so the informal form, to Germany with my parents, and my mother was trying to be really.
This is my contract. I want you to stick by it. Probably they will stick a gun on your head and thank you very much. You will have a bullet coming out of your other ear. South Africa, for instance, I mean, that was a great experience. Now I go all the way till Australia. Contracts exist, but having said that, first people shake hands on it. Like, mate, like, you know, you and I are professionals here, so why do you need a contract? You don't trust me. So then your rapport is already gone to shatters. US, of course, the contract is held as a ransom point for the coach. So the challenge here is contracts are brilliant. Now, problem in terms of you're going to stick by the processes indicated in the contract as a coach, and are you going to go with the exact coaching models that has been prescribed, or you are really wanting to be a coach who wants your coachee or a mentee to gain results and evolve. Now, culture again plays a huge role in this. Personal experience, sharing it here, if it's okay. Asia, when you are a coach or a mentor, the concept of the coachee knows everything and they need to decide for themselves doesn't exist at all, because the coachee wants you to tell them or him or her, I know what I need to do, but you tell me what I need to do. Because you are the coach. You are supposed to be the guru and the enlightened soul here. So I did start growing beards and stuff like that, but it didn't look good on me because airports, they stopped me. I'm brown. So, jokes apart. Whereas in Romania or like she said, like Holland or Germany, when I speak to people, coaches or mentees, they don't want me to tell them anything. They know everything. But what they don't know is how will it impact the others, according to them. So completely huge difference again. Ethics doesn't make any sense at all because it goes into a gray area. What is ethics? It's not a fine line anymore. And different cultures, you need to have different contracts. Actually, sometimes you don't need a contract also. And that's one thing where I go with culture, where I come back to culture. It's a very essential thing, but how are we going to define what is culture? Whose culture are we talking about here? Magic question. Whose culture? Who defines culture? I might be a single dad married to probably an LGBT category, which is giving you a thing. So broader culture, but coming down to smaller culture. Yeah. I'm a single dad. I'm also a smoker. So, and I actually don't care a damn about anything, but I'm spiritual, following the path of Taoism. My dad was Vietnamese. My mom was Dutch. And I grew up in Africa. Now define my culture.
Yes, and exactly that's part of the thing, I think, where we were talking about very much at the beginning. It's sort of
Right.
being aware of things and creating this difference between and creating this awareness of you know, which are the values that you hold individually.
Beautiful, yeah.
And reactions towards something.
Mm-hmm.
You know, and it's exactly that, you know, that, and I think this is where the coach can really come in, because I'm almost doubting if somebody comes to me and says, I'm doing cross-cultural coaching or I'm doing cross-cultural training, because it's a very superficial framework of, you know, Spanish people like to take long lunches. Which is true and it's lovely, but you know, it's a kind of thing of, you know, I know this, but I don't connect on an emotional value level. I connect on a, oh, that's lovely level. And actually my interpretation might be entirely wrong, because I'm now interpreting it from my value level of, oh, isn't it nice to have a nice lunch? If I come from the UK, 15-minute lunch at the desk, and I'm sitting there, oh, it's going to be 2 hours with wine, lovely. And I've completely disconnected the real meaning of the lunch, because to me, it's just a nice thing. And so I think the coach has to come in there. And that's where the role of the coach is, to bring this out. And I think the point there, this is where, kind of what you can, is like, you're creating something that's more universal. And that is the sort of thing of the cultural intelligence.
Yeah.
Where the person becomes, so that they know that cultural differences exist, which is a challenge sometimes in very monocultural societies. Where people are just not out of bad ill will, but they're just not exposed to, for example, to other cultural ideas, values, actions. Then if you look at cultural intelligence, then it's sort of the second thing is, this capacity to actually change a behavior of yourself and accommodate this difference that is there. And thirdly, and this is kind of the other kind of thing, is actually being motivated to do so. Yeah.
Interesting.
And it's so if you look at the cultural intelligence as a concept, it's really a very powerful thing. And I think in a way, that's where the chance of, I didn't want to dish cross-cultural, intercultural coaches, but this is where the chance of the coach in that scenario in particular is coming in, because there is bound to be, if somebody is moving to another country or to another cultural context, it doesn't really have to be, yes, you're very right in this sort of thing. It doesn't have to be another country, but or even another culture, is exposed to another culture, maybe, put it this way, or to another cultural being. There's bound to be this sort of little things, so Cristina, for example, was talking about the brooch.
Marty, sure.
Like, to me, it was just the brooch until she kind of started to talk about the meaning. So now I know something about it, and it becomes sort of like, okay, it doesn't necessarily call for a lot of accommodation, but, I kind of got to, so on the next person I might recognize and go, oh, I know something about this. But sometimes, maybe this kind of thing of, and I'm sort of thinking of examples which are really good at this kind of cultural intelligence kind of thinking. And I think it's just being very aware of a potential difference. And at the same time, as you said, if you look at the models, like Hofstede is 1960s.
Yeah.
Schwartz is 1990s. Globe Value Survey is early 2000s. They're all very, the one good thing about them is they're all very consistent. No matter from where anybody came from, they got very consistent results, which goes to show that, at least if you measure a country at the country level, and remember we're talking about a country at a country level, and no matter which way you pick to measure the values, you come to values that are, well, value clusters and descriptions that are not dramatically different. Exactly,
yeah.
We know the model is sort of okay. But, and then comes, what you were saying, then there comes the melting pot. Then there comes all these hyper multicultural people. And I'm completely with you, that in the beginning, I kind of talked about, my path. And, everything now starts to become relative, right? So I was recently talking to a friend here who kind of said, for example, in Germany, he said, oh, you're always so happy. And I was like, okay. And it reminded me of a conversation with somebody in Spain who was like, oh God, you're just sometimes so German and grumpy. And I'm sitting there going like, well, which one is it? And suddenly you realize it's like, well, actually, it's none of the two, right?
The happiness index took a dive, huh?
Sometimes most of them.
I'm probably somewhere in the middle.
Oh yeah. It's kind of interesting. So there's one observation what I made, like probably just worth the 2 cents on this. In fact, very interestingly, the ethical dilemma of coaching versus mentoring. Yeah. So okay, I'm going to be very. This is going to open up a Pandora's box altogether. See, we all understand what an oxymoron is, isn't it? So when essentially a coaching contract as prescribed by ICF, I do see the logo at the back, and then EMCC or whatever, all the major coaching bodies, which all started after real coaching, how do I put it, started, yeah. Now, all of them prescribe that a coach is not the person who has to give a solution. A coach is a person who enables thought process or whatever it is. Amazing. All right, but it's a complete oxymoron in terms of what the hell a coach and a coachee are getting into. It's a contract. It's a commercial contract. It's a service. Yeah, that's number one. So number two here is, so the contract says the coach is not responsible for the repercussions. What reality says, or practicality says, a coach better be responsible for whatever he or she influences, how he or she influences in terms of thought process in the coaching. That's true. And that is where coaching becomes completely a farce. Because if I'm not supposed to be held responsible for how I enable your thought process, right? And then I'm not liable at all. So that means I don't have to be responsible for what I do. So it goes into a different value system altogether. I gotta be, fundamentally, I need to have a principle. That's one. Now, having said that, these contracts itself themselves create a culture in coaches, which gives an interesting way of escapism. Like for instance, like I'm a coach, but my contract says I'm not responsible for your results. Thank you very much. So I'm just going to ask questions, and I will try to be empathic, which means a lot of things. As against a mentor who is from the beginning comes in as, listen, we are only going to share thought processes, stories, experiences, and stuff like that, and we evolve together. Coaching probably, as prescribed by all these big organizations, has to be rethought about. What is a good coach? Case in point, I started coaching in 1996, when ICF was not even a thought process in terms of formal coaching. So that makes me ancient. Now, where I'm going with, we talked about cognitive behavioral coaching in those days, performance coaching from the sports field. There it was very simple. A coachee didn't do something right. The coach took the coachee by his or her throat. Dude, it's your goddamn life. Why the hell aren't you doing it? Fast forward, in the politically right world right now, a coachee cannot even ask that, because it's the coachee's prerogative to fail or succeed. So
let me jump in here for a second, because I think there are a couple of components in what you're saying. I think that in there's the component of how is coaching perceived in different cultures. Because if you look at Africa, for example, everyone says, I go to a coach, which I assume that I'm going there and I'll get a list of to-dos. And I'll have to go home and make sure that I do all of them, because otherwise, like you're saying, I'm going to get in trouble. That's what the perception of coaching is. And this is how it's being done in Africa, for example. I've been working with a couple of schools and things, and everyone expects the same thing, that I'm going to come there and have a list of what they're supposed to do. And I'm like, so what do you want to get out of this session? What? But that's the perception of coaching in a different culture. So that's one component of what you're saying. The other component in there, I think it's the component of what's the difference and how do we perceive and understand coaching in relation with mentoring, and mentoring in relation with coaching, and how are the two dancing together, because at some point they are dancing together. I think the other layer that you're adding in there is the evolution of coaching and the diversification of coaching, because there has been a lot of evolvement when it comes also to tools, models, ways of doing, ways of understanding it, and so on. I think that what ICF and ENCC and all of the big associations, what they're trying to put together with the core competences, because their core competences as a language works also fits with ICF and ENCC, is like, what would be the common understanding of all of these things? So like lay the foundation, and on there, build things.
Perfect. Yeah.
The other thing that you were saying in there, how do you hold somebody accountable? I think that comes part of how do you address those things through the questions and through the language. And I think in there that there's definitely everyone, and every coach has their own, I love this saying from Svea, everyone has their own signature, coaching signature.
True.
And I think at the end of the day, if you look at all of the coachees that go to the coach, they go for that particular signature because they feel like that particular person would give me what I need and what I resonate with. And I think that's part of what also ICF, like you were saying, this contract that comes at the beginning, which is making sure that the two can work together. And is this acceptance of that's the signature that I'm looking for, this is the same kind of person that I can work with. So that's, again, this contracting. But this contracting, I think if you ask me, looking now through my profession as a consultant million years ago, that's the same thing that a consultant does. I mean, I really loved this definition of a consultant back in the days when it was like, that's the person that tells you what time is it right now using your own watch. And that fits also with a coach. You know, a coach tells you what time is it using your own coach or your own watch. So tells you which direction you should go using your own compass. If you want to put it now into more journey terms instead of practical, that makes me realizing that we have about 10 more minutes. No, I'm not German. Talking about a cultural assumptions. But I think that's a beautiful debate, Rajesh, that you're bringing in there. And I think it has multiple components that is like with the onion that Stephan showed us at the beginning. Once you start peeling all of those things away, you start looking at the core, like the definition of, like you said, democracy is good. That's an assumption. So take it, coaching is good. Okay, why? How? How do you define good? How do you define coaching? How do you define that coaching has an impact on good, and so on? So you can go into all of the discussions, which definitely they're useful. And now, brackets open, that was what we wanted with this festival, to have those discussions because it brings value to everyone. And now I come with a layer on top and I ask you, how do you define those conversations when they happen in a different language? Because if I look at myself, for example, if you ask me to use English, I'll have a certain way of adjusting my personality because I need to integrate that language. If you ask me to speak Romanian, and this is another beautiful thing, you know, I look also in Romania also at my relatives. If you ask them to talk to the relatives that where they grew up, so exactly like really that certain location in Romania, they will have a different attitude. They will project a different way of being because of the language that they're using at that certain moment. Same way. No, if I need to speak German, I'll be a bit different because German language, okay, imposes a bit of more stress on me. But I think the same thing happens also in coaching. How do you act, and what happens to you when you have to mix in there the cultural level plus the language level, and make sure that you are paying attention of who you are as an environment, or your own culture, like you said it, with the culture that builds around, or cultural context, like Stephan said, around the coachee. So what are your both thoughts, both of you, what are your thoughts on this one? I see Vlad also going like, oh my God, this is late and we're going into a tough debate. So Stephan,
I was just thinking that actually the feedback we got that this session should be about 1.5 hours is quite accurate. And I still have from the beginning the onion in my mind, because when you peel the onion, you start crying. And this crying is giving me the image that actually culture is connected with identity. If you understand your culture, you are able to define your identity. And in coaching, if you look at the onion model, then many times you find that if you change the context, the coachee will change values, will understand rituals and everything else in different way. And this is making many times people crying, as this is what is giving hard time to fit in different contexts. And the question for the end of the session from my part is how we can flex our cognitive and emotionally flexibility, how we can improve our capacity, because at this moment it's obvious everywhere in the world there is a polarization, and our capacity to understand the person we have in front of us, to not go after the generalization, and having meaningful contract or conversation on, like American says, be on the same page, it's quite hard. So how can we do it better for us and for people around us?
This is the search for the Holy Grail. And this is where the question comes. As a coach, what is your actual role? As a coach, what are you doing here? Are you enabling, or are you making the other person think, or solutionizing? This is the management speak about a consultant. But having said that, one reality is in a coaching relationship or a mentoring relationship, but mainly coaching relationship I'm talking about, the coachee is the most important person, because the coachee is in demand of something. So the coach is essentially supplying that demand, right? So like Africa, for instance, that is where I coined this terminology called plug and play solutioning in coaching. So many coachees come and say, I have 4 things I need to solve. Tell me what are the things that I could go and plug and play and then get my results. Thank you very much, right? So here, the important person is the coachee. So for me to understand the coachee, so there are 2 aspects. One is how he or she thinks, the intrinsic motivation, whatever it is, for performance also, and how he or she portrays it outside, which is perception management. So, and that is where culture plays an important role, which is talking about like Hofstede or Trompen or whoever we are talking about. All of these plays a great role, like what Stephan was also talking about, cultural intelligence, for instance. So if coachee is the most important person, then we need to talk about what is the coachee's culture, not from where he or she is coming in from, but what is the coachee's value system, number one, what is the coachee's thought process, ego states, or what personality traits and all those things. And then the performance interferences this coachee can have. How these things find out a solutioning, probably the coachee goes out happy. God knows. Like in Arab states, we say, Inshallah. So as God willing, you might be fine. As God willing, you may not be fine, but it is God's will. So let's leave it at that. But which God are you going to pray for? Who knows? Depends on your brought it also. So,
Stephan, what are your thoughts on this one?
Tricky. I was thinking of 2 things actually. And they both go a little bit beyond the coaching. But I guess they're both things where the coach can help. First of all, the coach, of course, can help in realizing if there is a value clash, even if it's a small value clash and a sort of small thing. That thing is a really good place for a coach to work with. On a more practical level, if you're actually in that situation and you are sitting there and kind of, you have to deal with this, I think there are 2 things you can do. One sounds a little bit esoteric, and the other one is a very practical device. Get an accomplice. So if you're a manager who is in a particular country, get an accomplice who understands your culture and the local culture, because it's sort of like a sidekick, because that's super important. Because if you have a mentor, I guess in that case it would be more mentor, but with that would be perfect, because they can reframe and rephrase what's going on. So if you're, for example, frustrated by negotiations that keep on going, somebody might be able to say, no, 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 no. What they're doing is they're supporting you because they want something. So I remember once being in that situation where, you know, our negotiations keep on going on, and then eventually I was speaking to a local friend, and he said, no, no, no. What they're doing is they're going to have a signing ceremony at the end where they're making a thing that looks like a negotiation, and they are training you to be good at that end thing, which was something I would have never thought about, you know, but it was about that. It was sort of, you know, creating this, and it needed somebody. And there, you know, I think no coach in the world would have gotten that out of me, you know, to think about that we're doing that. And that brings to the second one. And I think that if you are going to go cross-culturally or out of your comfort zone, even in a way, you know, and this is where it sounds a little bit esoteric, but come from a place of love and think that the other person will want good. I know sometimes it can be a little bit bad, you know, because you could fall
Very
into
true.
it. But, you know, the other person that's opposite you is probably acting within their own cultural assumptions and probably wants to do the same deal, do the same thing. So they are just as interested as you are in getting this done. So they are coming from a point of pushing towards good. And I think sometimes people fall into the trap of assuming they come from a place of bad, but they don't, you know? And so try to understand directions in that positive interpretation. Then things should be workable.
That's such a beautiful note to say, this place of love, and how come that place of love should be brought also in different cultures, to make sure that we all, you know, assume that the one in front of us has good intentions, and that's those good intentions are built into their values. This is like, we're going now in a more of a utopic sense of
Amen to that.
yeah, the world reality. No.
Oh God, no, this is awesome. Guys, I would just request, like, you know, if you would like to, I'm almost on the end of finishing up with my book called Across Borders, Coaching Through Differences, actually. So probably I would like to share the initial prototype with you guys. It's a great medication for sleep-deprived people. So open after the first 2 pages. I guarantee perfect sleep within 25 seconds. Having said that, no, if you guys would like to get traumatized and have nightmares during your sleep, I would like to share my book with you guys, just for your feedback and stuff like that, whether I'm hallucinating or probably making sense. Or if it doesn't make sense, perfectly all right also. So just a thought process.
Thank you.
If I may, and if I can, actually, there's a permission, can I share it with you all, so that I could be guided by some of your thought process?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Sure, it's all mine.
That's wonderful. That's wonderful. I kind of like sense, I've seen also Annette leaving, that this would be a good moment to wrap up, as it seems like we've said it for 1 hour.
Bye.
We'll make sure that we stay longer. But Rajesh, it was wonderful that you could join us, and it was wonderful that you could share with us some other thoughts and challenge a process of thought. And definitely we would love to have more of that. So let's think about that point. And Stephan, any thoughts on how this entire hour went?
Thank you. And it went so, I think it was so nice because it was such a lively discussion. And so that's really good. And so also thank you to Rajesh for coming in and challenging and bringing in the new things for Vlad, so asking kind of really good questions. And of course, Cristina, for you, kind of like amazing questions and inviting me. So thank you so much. It was absolutely fantastic. Really great experience.
Thank you. We'll definitely have to think about how do we continue. Then I do, now telling a bit what happened behind the scenes. I know for sure that we have one more topic that will come along with Stephan, and this might be also of interest for you also, Rajesh, because we were going into a mix of marketing and medicine and ethical topics in there. So
Are you guys stalking me or something like that?
No, I don't know who's talking, so but we definitely have topics that are thoughtful.
Trivia.
Yeah,
I will give you.
like, I mean, what kind of tea do you drink? No, that's we go into
I will,
something
I will, I
serious.
will give you a trivia. I launched in Romania. I've been experimenting quite a few things in Romania. So one of those experimentation was the coaching academy for healthcare professionals. Actually, it was a success in the initial, and then healthcare professionals became smart and they told me, okay, I need medication. So it was very good. But jokes apart, this is a concept I trialed out in 2016 onwards, and actually it's doing great. And it's one of the academies. They are not mine now, it's with somebody else. And the medical professionals have taken it over. It's doing really good. So yeah, we could.
We did already a teaser for the next conversation. You know, you bring that experience. Stephan has, trust me, there a lot of knowledge. Vlad with a medical background, oh yay. And what comes to my mind when you said that is that there is the humanitarian coaching network. So maybe we kind of like do a really nice conversation, bringing a lot of parts to the table and see what comes out of it. Cool.
Lovely. Count me in 100%. Yeah, fun.
Anyway, we'd love to continue the discussion with some posts and comments on Coaching and Mentoring Festival to see how we can get other points of view and how we are able to develop ourselves and understand each other better. It's, from my point of view, how we can get bridges between us and have a better world.
And may I put a small challenge now in the last 2 seconds of what kind of word would you use to say goodbye, considering your cultural context or your own culture?
Very interesting. Asia, India. Okay, I'm in India. So in India, we don't have goodbye. That's a beauty, right? And for instance, in Romania, no, I also am in Romania. There is something called la revedere, which means like till I see you again. So it's not a goodbye. So it's till I see you again or whatever. It's very interesting. Goodbye is a very English or no idea. So a lot of cultures don't have a goodbye word actually. So in Tamil, I speak 7 Indian languages. None of them have goodbye. So
maybe fits better because there is a Romanian way of saying it is pe curând.
Pe curând, da.
So Stephan, till shortly, so to say.
It's like arriving soon, or yeah, pe curând, arriving soon, or pe curând in a short while. Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah.
Stephan, what would be from your perspective? What would you think?
I think I was just thinking it's somewhere between the Portuguese até logo. So see you soon. Or the German auf Wiedersehen, because I don't like the goodbye either. So, goodbye. No, it's like it. So the auf Wiedersehen might be one, which is au revoir, really. Yeah, same thing. And then até logo, see you soon.
Cool. So I have words of feather flocked together because we are also on Proverbs this week.
Very true.
Yeah. Cool. So we take it as see you shortly, see you soon. Definitely keep in touch.
Thank
you all.
Take care. Have a lovely weekend.